jump right into this. So the first file that I want you to open, there's a file in here called dustremoval.psd. So you might say, oh, God, Versa, that photo is so dated. It is, but that's because it's been that long since I've actually shot film. So at any rate, what I want everybody to do is if you can come up to the upper left-hand corner of this guy. I want you to zoom in pretty tight on this guy. And you can see that up here in the left-hand corner part here, we have a couple of issues. We've got dust clearly on this. This was it was a E6 35mm transparency, and so there's dust on it up here. There's actually a scratch on it right here. If you zoom your way over, say what? And what? Oh yeah, there's a scratch on his chest. So there's, I mean, it's in pretty bad shape, or it's in pretty rough shape. So how would you guys go about fixing the dust on this image? What would you do? The Band-Aid tool, the healing brush tool, and paint it all out. So you'd go in here and one at a time go through all of this stuff, right? Okay, other people. Is that how you would all do it? Yeah, healing brush tool or clone stamp tool. That's the other way people would go after this. I'm going to try and show you a completely different way of doing this. So first things first, I'm going to simply make a copy of this layer. So in the layers palette at the bottom, simply drag down to make a new copy of this guy. With the history palette, everybody has a, does everybody have their retouching layout the same way I've got mine? Have you got the history palette that's on the left-hand side? All right, I need you to click on the history palette. This is not by default. You need to do a couple of changes here in how the history palette actually works. So to do that, I want you to come over, and it's the little three, it's the menu that actually functions for the history palette. So if you look at the, across the top of the palette, there's the little 3 lines or 4 lines, whatever. If you click on that, you'll get a drop-down menu, and you can come down to History Options. So I need everybody to get to History Options, and a dialog box will open up. And by default, the only one that's actually enabled is this automatically create first snapshot. That's what this little small image is right here. This is called a snapshot. You also need to, though, check this automatically create new snapshot when saving. And then you also need to check this show new snapshot dialog by default. Now, I would strongly suggest these machines here in the digital lab, they reset every night. So these things get turned off every night. But I strongly suggest on your own laptops or your own working machines, whatever, that you guys go home tonight and turn these things on. Or in Bridget's case, because she's going to be burning the midnight oil way too late and probably going home when the sun is rising. Do this first thing in the morning. No, just kidding. Just kidding. So at any rate, I'll show you what these things mean. So I'm going to say OK to this. So the first thing we're actually going to do is we are going to save this file now that we've got a second copy. So to save the file, come up to the File menu and come down and do a Save As. You don't even have to do a Save As. You can just do a save, and you can save it where it is because you guys are probably going to throw this away. So just come up and do a save, and it'll actually save it. But you'll also see right here at the very top of your history palette, you just got a new stamp. And what this new stamp is right here, it's time stamped as well, is what your image looks like when you just saved it. That is what we just added. When we clicked on that and we did this history options, it's this one right here, automatically create new snapshot when saving. And the advantage of having this is that every single time we work on these images, every time you save it, it's going to create a new snapshot for you here. Now, most of you guys know we set up this was class number 1. You remember in our very first class, we set up history states to have 50 history states. You guys all remember that part? Who doesn't remember that part? Okay. Really quickly, up to the Photoshop menu, down to Preferences, down to Performance. And when Performance opens up, you will see right here, under History States, there's a number 50, unless you've changed it for some reason. 50 is the default, and it's a good one to have, so I would go ahead and leave that there. No real reason to go beyond that. However, what that means is that here in the History palette, it's going to remember up to 50 states. And then what will happen when you go to the 51st state, it will throw your very first one away. And it will only, so it only remembers 50. So by the time you get to your 100th state, number 49 has been thrown away. So does that sort of make sense, right? However, these history states that you save up at the top are unlimited, and these will continue to track. So the advantage of having history states like this is twofold. Number one, if something horribly goes wrong and you don't know it's actually something horribly has happened, you can, let's say you've been working on, people have been talking about this all along. People have worked on these images for 8 hours, right? I mean, do you guys have those sort of editing sessions? I know Liz does. She just talked about it. We all do, right? So what happens when you get to the end of it and all of a sudden you realize that, oh, the whole retouching layer that I was working on got moved at some point and it's no longer viable. And then you say to yourself, well, that's 8 hours of work. Well, not really. If you've had that enabled, you can actually then start to step back through your saved states. Yes, you will lose work that you've done, but with any luck, it'll only be an hour or 2 or 3 or whatever, but it's just something to actually to have. Does that sort of make sense? The other thing is that we can actually paint with history states, which is what we're going to leverage right now tonight. So at any rate, that's what's going on here. You can make your own history states as well by simply clicking on this little camera icon. So let's, for instance, let's do a third copy of this layer. So I'm just going to come up and drag this guy down to create a third copy of it. I've got 3 layers right now, and I'm going to come over and I'm going to click on the little camera at the bottom of the history state. And when I do that, it's going to say, do you want to do a snapshot of this? And I'm going to go say, you would want to name this snapshot something meaningful. We'll get into this in just a second, but I'm just going to leave it as snapshot number 1. That's the other thing that we enabled when we clicked on this history state options, is that you get this dialog box that comes open. So go ahead and say OK to that. Now, if you come up to the top of your image, if you click on the very first of the history states, the dust removal.psd, this is what your image looked like when you opened it up, and you can see that there's a single layer there. If you click on the second snapshot down that's time-stamped at 8:06 something, you'll see that you've got the second layer here. That's what your image looked like when we saved it. And then finally, if you click on the third one, you'll see we have 3 layers here, because that's what your image looked like when we saved it. One of the things, though, that you need to notice that's really critical about working with these history states, though, is the minute we selected one of these history states, all of your history steps got grayed out. Does that make sense what's going on here? And now if I were to go back down to the bottom one and select it, I get those states back. But if you click on this snapshot or one of the other states as well, but I'm just going to click on snapshot, you'll see that your history steps are grayed out. If we then make another copy of this layer, you'll notice you've lost all of your history steps and you only have one step, and it's this duplicate layer, and the others are gone. There's no getting them back. You still have your history states. You can still dance back through here and get back to the very beginning. But if there's stuff that you did in those intermediary steps, whatever, those guys are gone. All right, so I'm going to go back to what my image looked like at this 8:06. You can throw history states away as well. So I'm going to grab this thing. It's called snapshot number 1, and I'm going to drag it to the little garbage can there to actually get rid of it. You should have then 2 layers that are sitting over here in your palette. Does everybody have this part? We good? Okay, so this is the trick. Up to the filter menu, down to noise, down to dust and scratches. So take a look at my screen to see where I'm at. The filter menu to noise to dust and scratches. Now, usually in filtering, I will do this on smart objects, but in this case, what we need to do, the work we need to do on this is destructive. So you would have to do this on a rasterized layer. It won't work on a smart object. So I'm going to go ahead and say dust and scratches on here. It's going to open up a menu, open up a dust and scratches dialog box, and you need to zero everything out. So you need to grab the radius and drag it all the way to the left, which will give you a radius of 1 pixel, and grab threshold and drag it all the way out so that it's sitting on levels. So what this basically does is this. It runs an algorithm and it looks at the size. How big are your dust particles? You don't know how big they are. You need to actually just start stepping your way through here. What I'm looking for here, I'm going to actually zoom into my image a little bit more. You see that there's this one giant hunk of dust right here, and then there's also this scratch right here. Those are the two things that I'm really going to look at. This hunk of big dust right here, I don't need this tool to eliminate that. There's not that much of it. What I need the tool to eliminate are all these other little dots of dust around here. So if I push this tool so hard that I actually do manage to get rid of this last guy, it's probably going to be too aggressive. So I just want to make sure I get rid of everything else. I want to make sure I get rid of the scratch, and I want to make sure I get rid of all the other little dust. But I'm not going to pick the biggest hunk of dust on my image and try to use this tool to get rid of that. Now, if there was a ton of them, if there was like a ton of them this size, I would actually use this tool to go after that size. But this is a one-off. It's not, I don't think there's that much else in there that's going to be that bad. So that's how I'm going to approach this thing. So the trick to it is that you want to set your pixel radius first. And again, what we're trying to do, we're trying to tell the tool how big these particles of dust are. So if you drag across the radius that says number 1, you can actually use your arrow keys, your up and down arrow keys, to go up and to step into number 2, and then up to number 3, and then up to number 4. And then at number 4, I can faintly see the scratch. At 5, the scratch is gone. I've got a couple of other dust spots that are actually on here, but as it turns out, they're on my screen. So that's why you actually move this guy around. If you move your image around and you don't see the dust particles, if the dust particles don't move, they're on your screen, not on your image. So at any rate, that's where I'm going to go. I'm going to do a 5 pixel. It actually managed to get rid of that one guy pretty well, the big one as well. So I'll just consider that as a bonus. The next thing you want to do is set threshold. And what threshold does is that I'm going to drag my radius down just a second so you can see. What threshold does is it looks at the difference in tonality between your particle of dust and the area that's around it. And it says, okay, how many tones different do you need this to be for me to run this tool on it? So you can see if I actually grab the sampler tool right here, and I'm going to zoom way in on this particle. I'm going to go to, let me get out of Dustin Scratches really quick, just so I can show you what threshold really is. So I'm going to go out to my color sampler tool. If I hover over this dark part right here, I'm getting a readout in the mid 160s, so or mid 150s probably would be a closer thing to say. So I've got a red of 163, a green of 155, and a blue of 139. So it's sort of in that mid range right there. When I come off that particle of dust and go out to the thing that's next to it, I'm getting a reading of 206, 202. So basically in the 190s, somewhere in there. So it's the difference in that 190 and the 150, 55, whatever. It's the difference in that tonality that I'm trying to establish with threshold. Does that make sense? All right, so again, back up to the filter menu, down to noise, down to dust and scratches. I am going to set my radius at 5, but then the trick to it is you start to drag your threshold up until you just begin to see the dust returning. So at a 17, again, I'm going to move this guy around, and it's just beginning to come back to me here. You can see if you drag the threshold all the way up, I'm going to bring it all the way up into the 30s. Up at here in the 30s, that what I'm saying is that I need there to be 37 different levels, differences in grayscale and luminosity for you to actually run this tool. It's bringing the dust back, so that's not actually going to work for me. So I'm going to start to drop it down again to just make sure I'm getting rid of all the dust. And I'm getting down to probably around, I'm still going to use my arrow keys to go down. And I'm around, let's see, where did you guys land? 8, yeah, I was going to say, yeah, 8 will go. 8 sounds good to me, sure, I'll go there. I'll go 9, because I hate even numbers.
I hate odd numbers.
Really?
Really?
Oh, come on, girl. That's a world of hurt for your careers in the arts. Oh, yeah. Okay, at any rate. How many people in here have better even birthdays than odd birthdays? How many have better odd birthdays than even?
Okay, my birthday does suck, and it's an even number.
Right, there you go. Okay. All right, so anyway, I'm going to go ahead and say okay to this. So what's now happened is we have actually, you can look over here in your history palette. You can see there's a history state right down here that says Dustin Scratches. It's actually, this thing has been run. It's been run on this second filter, on the second layer right here. We need to do a history snapshot of this right now. So if you click on the history snapshot, the new dialog snapshot's going to open up. You need to call this Dustin Scratches. And say okay to that. And then you'll see up here you have a history state that is called Dustin Scratches. However, we've still got a history state that exists down here, the real state where we actually did this. If you hit Command Z to undo that, it gets rid of it. So what I need to have is a state here that says Dust and Scratches, but it actually went back in time and it actually grabbed, so you can see all the dust is on there again. Does that make sense, everybody? Okay, here's the trick, guys. You do not want to pick the layer, the history state. You don't want to select it. You simply want to click on the box that's next to the history state. So you can see right up in here, by default, when these things open up in history, there's a little brush with an arrow going back against it that's sitting right next to dust removal.psd. That is by default the thing that we opened and where the history state is that we would use the history brush with. We want to select the box. Do not select this state. If you select the state, you'll see that all your dust and scratches go away. That's not what I want to do. I want to be working on this back state that's got all the history, all the dots are still on here, but with the icon, this brush icon is in the little box on the state that existed when the dust was gone. Does that make sense, everybody? We good on this part? Okay, finally, it's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The 11th tool down, if it's right under the clone stamp tool, if you click on the little lower right-hand corner in the flyout menu, you will see that you can either have the history brush tool or the art history brush tool. You want to select the history brush tool. The art history brush tool will make art out of your images. That's not what we're actually going to do here. And then finally, we have also touched on this in this class before. When we removed spill before, we actually used blending modes of brushes to remove the spill, didn't we? And also when we were refining our masks, we also used the overlay brush to actually refine masks, right? Well, we're going to do this with the history brush as well. When I look at this image, are the dust particles darker or lighter? They are darker. So to fix them, I want the history brush to actually lighten. So I'm going to click on my drop-down menu here, and I'm going to come down and I'm going to pick Lighten. And what that will do then, it will actually only change the elements of this image that are actually darker. So all the rest of the image is going to remain unchanged. So to see what this is like, simply come over onto your screen. I'm going to check the quality of my brush. I'm going to make it a completely soft brush. I'm going to leave it a pretty good sized brush because the blending mode of this is actually going to take care of this for me. And I'm simply going to paint out all my dust. So for you people who've been doing film one at a time, you now hate that part of your life, don't you? I'm going to kick and come over. There's this big scratch right here. I'm simply going to paint the big scratch out and all the other dust particles that are on there. That big scratch is looking like I probably set my threshold a little too high, so yeah, I would go in and probably revisit that. But you guys get where this whole thing is going, right? Okay, if we then zoom out, so hold down the Command and Option key to zoom out. Yeah, we're going to start this over because I don't feel like I got that whole scratch out. So to start this whole process over, I'm going to go back up into my second state, the one that got time stamped at 8:06. I'm going to throw my dust and scratches away. That was the history state that I made. Again, I've got everything back now just the way it was when I made that second layer. I'm going to go back up to filter, down to noise, down to Dustin Scratches. It's a sticky one, so it actually will remember where things were. It'll give you the same values again. So I'm going to drag the threshold back down. And I'm going to get down to around a 4. That actually seems like a better pick for me, so I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. Then again, I'm going to do a history snapshot of this. Call it Dustin Scratch. And say OK to that. What I want everybody to do is look at this guy's hair. I'm going to go back in time. Again, Command Z to undo that. Command, well, I'm unfortunately on the new version of Photoshop, so I will redo Dustin Scratches. So you can see that it pretty much destroys the image. So you can't run this on the entire image, which is exactly, I don't want to run it on the entire image. So again, Command Z to go back in history. Click on the little box that's right next to Dustin Scratch so that we can actually paint with this guy. I'm going to actually zoom out a little bit more, and I'm going to show you another trick, because if you think that was a good one, wait till you see this one. I'm going to hit the L key to get the lasso tool. Again, I'm working on that second layer here that's going to get rid of all of that. I'm going to then do a selection of this entire area of beach that's right behind this guy. So making just a really big, broad selection. Where I missed part of this area right up in here, I'm simply going to hold down the Shift key so that I can add to that selection. So I've got a big area of this selection going. I'm going to then come up to the Edit menu, down to Fill. So everybody look up at my screen, see where I'm at. Edit menu, Fill. And when the fill comes up in the contents in the drop-down menu, I'm going to say, I want to fill with history. And you're also going to change the blending mode and say, I only want to lighten this image. And then say, OK. Boom. It's all gone. Command D to deselect. Yeah. OK. To check a couple of other things out, we're going to look at the hair on this guy's chest, or the scratch that's on this guy's chest. I am going to go back to the history brush for that and not going to actually try and do a fill like that. I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller, and then I'm simply going to drag down through this line. Yeah, and this is where the film people go. You're kidding me, right? I've been doing all of this for all that time. And the advantage of doing it this way is that it actually gets rid of that stuff extremely well, but you don't screw up the rest of your image. So there's another scratch that's right here on the surfboard. It gets rid of that really well as well. It hopefully will get rid of this scratch right here. It does. So all of that part's great. I need everybody to zoom over to the girl, and you need to find her pocket, where her pocket is, and I'm looking for sort of this shoulder area right here. You'll see that there is a spot of dust right here, and it's the nature of dust. So the way dust works is wherever dust is laying on a light color background, you get dark dust. Wherever dust is laying on a dark background, you get light dust. It's the same damn dust, but it just renders itself differently. If we come over here and try to actually paint this out using our history brush, nothing happens. And the reason nothing is happening is because I've got my blending mode set to lighten. You need to change the blending mode to fix this to darken. And then when you click on it, it will get rid of that dust. Are there questions about this? History states are just major. So again, if we zoom in and then take a look at this image right now, I'm just going to come in at this frame. I'm going to just turn off the bottom and turn on the top version that's right here. You can see I could dust this image out in probably a minute. Yeah, I know. For those of you who have actually are film people, whatever, this is a game changer. All right, other questions about that? Are we good? All right, you can close this guy up. We don't need him anymore. There's another file in there called shadow working image file. I need everybody to open this guy up for me. And once you get this open, if you can, go down to the very bottom layer, hold down the Option key and click once. It'll turn everybody else off. There is a series of guides that are in this. See those little purple lines in here? Have we talked about guides in this class? No? All right, in order to use guides, guides are non-printing things, but they allow you to do all sorts of things in your, yes. Hold down the option key and click on the very bottom, the eyeball of the bottom layer. If you click on the eyeball again, it'll turn all the other layers on. It's just a fast way to turn a bunch of layers on and off. Okay, there are guides right here, but you guys don't have rulers showing. To get to the rulers, to have them show, you come up to the View menu, come down to Rulers, and have a little check mark next to that. Once you get rulers like this, you'll see in my case right here, these are in millimeters, I think. If you hold down your control key and you click on the ruler, you will actually get, it's in pixel count, you'll actually get a drop-down menu that will allow you to change the units of measurement for your ruler. So I can go from pixels to inches, or I can go to millimeters, or I can go to centimeters, or that's actually what's going on in here. Points are for type specifically, and picas are for their units of layout for printing. But in our case, I'm going to leave mine as inches right here. However, with the rulers visible, if you click on the ruler and simply drag out, you can pull out a guide. When you pull the guide out, you'll actually see you get a readout number, and that readout number, it's a Y with a colon and then actually a number in inches. This is telling me the Y-axis of this is top to bottom. The X-axis is left to right. So in this case, because I'm only pulling a guide down, I'm not changing anything right to left. It's only top to bottom. It's giving me a readout of where things are. If you let go, you'll actually see it's this purple line that's running across. The same holds true if you click on the ruler on the left-hand side and drag in this direction. It will actually come out for you in this direction as well. If you get close to the center of your image and then slow down, it will snap to the center of your image. So you can see right now, mine is snapped at an X of 4.125. That means this image is 8.25. It's 8 1/4 wide. So that image just snapped to that. To pick up a guide, you actually use the Move tool, which is the V key or the very top icon right here. That will then, when you actually hover over a guide, you will see that it actually, the icon changes to a double-headed arrow, and then you can actually click and move it around again to change its size. To get rid of your guides temporarily, not to get rid of them, but to hide them temporarily, hold down your Command key and hit the letter H. That will temporarily hide these. In most cases, when you do that on these computers the first time, if you get a dialog box, don't close it yet. The dialog box will be a warning, and it'll say to you, do you want Command H to hide the extras in Photoshop, or do you want it to actually hide Photoshop? You would always pick you want it to hide the extras, because the extras are things like this guide. Extras are also like the marching ants in a selection. You can actually hide those and still have them be active. If you made a mistake by some chance and you actually picked, you wanted to hide Photoshop, if you reset your preferences, that option will come back to you the very first time you hit Command H. If you hit Command H again, the guides will come back. If you want to get rid of the guides, you come up to the View menu and you come down to Clear Guides. I'm going to drag out one more guide right now. If you have trouble seeing the color of your guide because the color of your guide is really close to something that's in your image, in this case mine isn't, but if it was, you would come up to the Photoshop menu, down to Preferences, and you would come down to Guides and Grids and Slices. And a dialog will actually open up, and in here it will show you that you can actually, the color of your guides, you can see that this is a smart guide right here. It's a magenta color. That's what's actually happening on this guide. If you click on the drop-down menu, you not only could pick a different color, like I could go to green on that, but you could also come up here and click on custom and pick your own color. I am going to go back to magenta for this because it works, and I'm going to say okay to that. I don't need to see it though. I don't need a guide out there, so I am going to go ahead and clear my guides. You also have the option of locking your guides once you get them actually out on your screen. So that's what this guide would be about, but I'm going to simply clear the guide. So that's my first image. This is actually this is a composite of mine that we're going to be working on. So if we come up to click on the next layer, if you click on that, it's actually adding it's a different image that's actually adding leaves to create a busier background and to get rid of the big tree that's actually in the front part of that. If you hold down the shift key and you click on the layer mask, it gets rid of the layer mask and you only see the entire image that this thing was actually shot on, although the layer mask is actually still there. To get rid of that big red X through the layer mask, you click on it again and now you can actually see the composite. If you hold down the option key and you click on the eyeball of this second layer right now, it will show you only the second layer. It turns off all the other eyeballs, and so you can sort of see what the layer mask is actually doing. If you continue to hold down the option key and click on the layer mask itself, it will show you the layer mask. And this will be true of all these situations. So to get back to see the entire thing again, you would simply click on the pixel content, that smart object. If again you want to see what my whole background composite is going to look like, you would click on the background layer here, and this is going to be the composite part that we will actually work on. If you come up now and you click on the first of the curves on this, you'll actually see it was actually, I did it to bring the tone of this guy down. If you click on the property, that's the little guy that's sitting right here, you'll actually see all this curve is doing is actually kicking this part down. Down a little bit. You can see if you click on this, that little button, you can actually drag things down even further to make this more intense. That's one way of making your image lighter or darker. However, I want everybody to tear that little point off. If you tear that little point off and now you click on the eyeball for your curve, nothing changes because your curve is at its default. There's nothing has been changed on it. Another way that people will do darkening and lightening very quickly in an image, as opposed to reopening up this smart object, which you could do and reprocess it, but just a very quick way to do adjustments to make everything darker and everything lighter. You don't necessarily want to do this single point thing, because when I click and pull that single point down, what is really happening is it's making my shadow tones darker and my highlight tones a little bit darker, but to a lesser degree, because this curve is not being pulled down in a perfect fashion. To see it in a perfect fashion, it would actually look like this. You would have to keep a straight line, so I would be pulling both a straight line in like that. But again, that's not what I want to do. So I'm going to go back to my default on this. Instead, what you want to do for this curve is you can actually change the blending mode of the curve. So with the curve active, come up to the normal layer, the blending mode for normal, and you want to come down. We're going to start with multiply. And you can see that it makes your image radically darker, which is a good thing, but it's doing it evenly across the board. This is much closer. It resembles an exposure adjustment. So you can see it makes things considerably darker. In most cases, it's too aggressive, but if you hover over the opacity slider with your cursor, you will see that you get the little double-headed arrow thing on the finger. If you click and drag the opacity back, you can then fine-tune that darkening. So for me, I would be somewhere probably in right around an opacity of 40, and this is now what that blending mode has actually done. And it's actually far superior to doing it by clicking on a point and dragging down the curve. The inverse of this holds true as well. If you drag the opacity all the way back up to 100%, if you wanted this image to be lighter, the opposite of multiply is screen. So you would click on screen. You can see that your image is considerably lighter, again, blown out. But if you click on the opacity slider and drag it down, you can actually control how much lighter or darker you would want this image. Again, in my case, I want it a little bit darker, so I am going to go to multiply, and I am going to set my opacity right around in the high 30s, low 40s. That actually looks pretty good to me. So on and off, yep, that's sort of where I want to be. The next one, if you click on the next adjustment layer on top of this, this is a hue saturation layer, and again, I wanted it to be more fall than it was. So we're in like peak fall right now here in Chicago. Have you guys actually walked through Grant Park right now? It is on fire. It is beautiful. I know, it's like right now, you got to get out. The rest sometime in the next 2 or 3 days before, because you know it's all going to get blown to hell by next week, and it'll just be cold and dark. It's really intense right now. Yeah, it looks beautiful. At any rate, we digress. If you come up to the next one, you'll actually see that there's the body part of this image. If you click on this, it'll actually turn the girl, it'll turn the image of her on. Okay, so we need to talk about what's going on at her feet. So we need to anchor this girl into space, and you can see that she's just floating there. It's not really a believable thing at all. And the not believable part is a consequence of two things. Number one, there are no shadows that are underneath her feet, and there would be. And number two, if she was really standing on this moss, there would actually, some of this moss would actually be covering part of her shoe. It would actually be, she would be sinking in the moss slightly. So we need to achieve both of those things to actually anchor this girl in space. To do the moss part, it's not that difficult to do. So to actually do the moss part, if you click the smart object that actually is this girl, we're going to add a layer mask to that, just a blank one. So I'm simply clicking on the add layer mask part. It's actually added this blank one right here. And you can see if we hit the B key, I've just clicked on the B key to get the brush tool. I'm going to look at my brush tool, and I'm going to make sure that it is a completely soft tool, a soft brush. So again, 0% hardness. I'm going to click on the name Adobe to get that flat menu to go away. Make sure that you have a normal blending mode and an opacity of 100% and a flow of 100%. And then you can come over here, hit the D key to default your foreground and background colors to black and white. If, like me, your foreground color is white, that won't help us because you would be painting white on a white mask. That's where we're already at right now. Hit the X key to bring black up to your foreground to being your foreground color, and then we're simply going to click and drag across this part of this girl's shoe, and you can see that again it hides part of her shoe. Now, I personally don't think that that's really believable, but I just wanted everybody to know that that's what we're going to be doing here. That's the mask. I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that, and instead I'm going to come up to the drop down menu here. And if you come, your drop down menu for your brushes, I think, is going to look slightly different than mine. You never get this, and I know, and I've got to try to figure out why. I promised you I would tell you why, right? I'm going to drag this thing open. In this drop-down menu right here. So click on the little gear up here at the top, Liz. Do you have brush name checked? Do you have brush stroke checked? So this little gear that's right here are all checked, right? Yep. And how about show additional preset info? Yep. That's all checked, huh?
Mine comes up in folders. Like it gives me general brushes, dry brushes, wet, media. That's exactly what I have too. You just have all the brushes open, and all of our brushes are like in folders. I figured it out. Thank you, Parker.
What's causing this? Because I haven't figured it out. Oh, so just click on this to make it larger.
And then there are folders here, and when you click on the folders, all that stuff pops out.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, you got little circles up at the top and then a whole bunch of squares underneath it. Yeah. Just different types of brushes. Yeah, and that's pretty much what we're looking for. So if you click and you scroll down somewhere in here, you should run into stuff that's like grass. That's specifically what I'm looking for here. It's unfortunate they don't have a search for this guy, but this is what I'm looking for is grass. Can you guys find grass?
Who's Kyle?
Oh, I have no idea who Kyle is. So, what are your other folders? So, if it's not in general, what are your other folders?
Dry, wet, special effects.
Try special effects or dry. It's not going to be a wet brush. No, neither one.
No, I don't have that many either. I have Kyle's concept brushes.
Then do this. If you scroll all the way down, do you have legacy brushes?
No.
Okay, so let's see if we can find legacy brushes. Click again on the little wheel, come down, and we are going to get more, no, down here at the bottom. Do you see legacy brushes?
Click on that. Restore the legacy brush stuff?
Sure.
Where you at? It's there.
Did you find it?
Oh my god, now there's so many.
Yeah. And scroll down. Hopefully you can find grass.
Dry? Yeah, what's it?
Dune grass or just grass?
I just grass.
There's so many. What'd you find another project? Natural?
Default brushes under legacy brushes.
Yeah.
There we go.
Got grass?
Got grass.
All right, click on grass, because that's what your image is actually going to, that's what this brush is actually going to look like. So again, if you've selected the smart object, you'll notice that you don't get a brush because you can't paint on a smart object. But if you go to its mask, you actually can paint on this guy. And again, your brush size here is going to be determined. So my brush is a little bit too big. So I'm going to, again, use the bracket keys that are right next to the P key to make mine smaller. And I don't get a good preview of what this grass looks like. Let's find out what the guy really does look like. So go to the very top of your screen and actually add just a blank layer on the very top and fill it with, let's go ahead and fill it with white, because white is my background color. Command delete will fill that. And then I'm going to click and paint with my brush. And you can actually see, it's really hard to sort of see that profile, but if I just click on it and drag, you can sort of see what's going on. If I make my brush much larger, you can actually see it now. This is what's going on. That's not what I want. I want really the smaller version of that, because I really just want to sort of tear apart the very bottom of that shoe. So that's what's going on. So again, I'm going to make mine smaller, and that's still too big. Smaller still too big, smaller still. Yeah, I'm kind of like, I'm sort of right around like a 15 pixel or maybe a 20 pixel, something about along those lines. Actually might be a good number. Yeah, well, I'm going to try like a 20 pixel. I'm going to throw that layer away just because I was just using it as a preview. I'm back on the mask, the layer mask for this shoe that's right here. Again, black is my foreground color, because what I'm trying to do is just hide the bottom of that shoe, and I'm going to simply click and drag across this guy a couple of times, sort of repeatedly, to sort of break up how perfectly that is actually in there. Yeah. If you're getting a little frustrated and you're feeling like it's not coming in fast enough, I'm just going to make my brush one step larger and try that guy. And that's actually feeling pretty good for me right now. I'm not going to do the same thing on the other side, because on the other side it wouldn't really make any sense like that. There's nothing that she would really be sinking down into. But to see the difference in terms of what we just did, hold down the Shift key and click on your layer mask, and you can see that we're simply bringing in something to cover that shoe a little bit. And she feels clearly more anchored in that. There's a little area that's right down here on the bottom that I never got with that brush. So to fix that, I'm going to again click on my drop-down menu for my brushes. I'm going to go back up to the top. I'm going to select a hard brush that is still pretty round, but again, it's a 100% hard brush. I'm going to click on that, and then I'm going to zoom in on this, and I'm going to finish getting just that little part right there. So you can see it's sort of torn up the part of the shoe a little bit to help make this a little bit more believable. Okay. I'm going to double click on the hand to kick back out and then zoom in again. I always just sort of like to work my way in to see if I do believe how things are going on here. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is we actually need to paint a shadow for where this shoe would be overhanging on this rock right here. So to do that, you want your shadows to always be underneath your body. And to see what I mean by that is we're going to do this. We're going to start with one that's on top of the body first to see what I'm talking about. If you click your very top layer right here, it's actually the border of this girl. As a matter of fact, I'm going to throw the border away. There's a layer here that's actually clipped to this girl. Just throw that guy away for me right now. Yeah, let's just leave that, because I don't want to complicate this any more than it is. So I've basically just got the girl, I've got two adjustment layers, and then I've got two layers that are building up my background. So with the girl selected, I'm actually going to add a blank layer on top. I'm going to hit the B key again to get a brush. I'm going to make sure that this is a completely soft brush now by dragging it all the way back like that. Black is my foreground color, and I'm just going to try to paint in the shadow that's underneath this. I'm going to make my brush a little bit larger, and I'm going to simply paint a shadow that I would imagine to be sort of underneath this. And the problem that you see with this is that as you're painting this thing, you're covering her shoe. It's on top of the figure now. Because our layer stacking actually works in order, we are now actually putting this on top of the girl. That's not where you want this thing to be. If you drag this layer down underneath the girl, you will actually see that that shadow now goes underneath the girl. You don't need to worry. I need to worry about the shape of the shadow, but I never need to worry about it being on top of the figure, because in my layer stacking order, it's the shadow is coming first and then the girl is on top of that. So the shadow is always going to be where it needs to be. Does that sort of make sense? We good on this? Okay, this is the wrong shaped shadow. So to fix that, I'm going to, with the shadow layer actually active, hit Command A, which should select everything, and hit the delete key, and it will get rid of it. Command D to deselect. And then we're going to try to paint this a little bit better. So while I'm working underneath this, I'm going to simply click and drag it down a little bit and try to imagine how that shadow would actually be. Now the shadow itself should actually be somewhat soft, so you can see even by that slight little addition right there that that whole thing helped out a little bit. If you hold down the Option key and click on the eyeball of that though, you can see what the shadow actually looks like. And this is not really a very believable shadow, but I'm just sort of like pointing out to you the different ways that people would actually create shadows for this. Does this sort of make sense where we're going here? All right, but I'm going to show you a much better way to build shadows. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to hit Command A and then delete to get rid of that. Command D to deselect. I'm going to turn the girl back on. I'm going to turn all the curves back on and the backgrounds back on. Another way to actually turn on and off a bunch of layers in a row, if you simply click on the eyeball on one and drag straight down in a line, it turns everybody off. You can do the exact opposite going back up, so I'm just holding down the Shift key and running my way all the way up, and it turns everybody else back on. So to do better shadows and the way I do shadows now, and I think that's the more successful way of doing shadows, is we use the gradient tool. So to do that, we need to start out with a blank layer. Again, you need a blank layer that's sitting underneath the girl. I'm going to double click on the thing that says Layer 1, and I'm going to call this Shadow 1. And say OK to that. Then you need to go to the gradient tool. The shortcut for it is the G key. If you simply hit on it, it'll actually pick the gradient tool. If you're looking for the gradient tool over here in your tools palette and instead you see a paint bucket, it's because the paint bucket tool sits in the same flyout menu. It's just been selected. But we want to actually use the gradient tool. I just wanted you guys to know if you can't find it, that's why you can't find it. With the gradient tool selected, you will see that, again, things change up here at the very top at our options palette up here. We need to set these options. So the first thing we need to do is set what type of gradient we want to do. So if you click on this drop-down menu up here, you will see that there's a set of presets that you have. The first preset always is foreground to background color, and that's what's actually, because our foreground and background are black and white, that's what's going on here. The second one is actually foreground color to transparency. This is the one that we want to pick. So you're going to pick foreground color to transparency. Then there's a series of gradient types that exist right up here at the top. We're going to take a look at all of these right now. So with this new layer selected that's called Shadow 1, turn the image of the girl off. As a matter of fact, hold down the Option key and turn everybody off except for this one shadow. I just want you to see what's going on with these different types of gradients. So with just this one blank empty layer showing, you should have just the checkerboard. We're going to look at the first gradient first. So I'm going to click on this first gradient, foreground to background color, and I'm also going to click on the first gradient icon, this one right here. It's called linear gradient. Then simply come over into your image and click and drag from the left to the right and let go. And you can see what it's doing is giving you a linear gradient. It's going from black through the middle layers, middle levels of gray to white on the other side. So that's basically a linear gradient. If you click, don't change anything else, simply click at the top of your screen and drag down, you'll see that your gradient gets rewritten. Every time you click on this and change, the gradient is redrawn. So they're not cumulative. It's not going to add on to your whatever was already there. They're not cumulative. If you click and you drag down on a diagonal, it will give you a diagonal gradient.
How come if I click it won't show me?
It won't show you what?
Like, if you click and drag, it does it here, but.
Oh, let me come around really quick. Is this working for everyone else?
Mine appears to be cumulative.
Yours does what?
It's cumulative. I can keep getting more and more gradients. Yep. The second option, I think I was. Yeah, still.
Yeah, no, it's working right. Okay, yeah. Yeah, that looks like a Photoshop restart to me. Let's just see what happens if you had another one. Oh, the layer wasn't on. The eyeball wasn't on. Makes sense. That was off. You're on.
Okay. Wow.
Okay, is it working for everybody else?
Still cumulative.
Did what?
You just switch it from the foreground to background with the checkerboard and just go to white.
This one right here. Yeah. And click and drag.
Okay,
Yeah.
now it's.
Okay. Okay. If you hold down, so come to the right-hand side. I'm going to double-click on the hand just to kick back out a little bit so you can see. With the GT key selected, if you click on the right side and you drag across to the left and add the Shift key, it will restrict your gradient drag to being perfectly horizontal. So that's how you would get a perfectly horizontal one. If you click and you do the same thing going up and down, it will actually restrict it to being perfectly vertical. And finally, if you click and you drag on a 45-degree angle in either direction, it will do the exact same thing. So it's just a way to restrict those gradients. If, however, we actually change this drop-down gradient from foreground to background color, click on the next one over. This is actually foreground to transparency. What you'll now see if you click and you drag across is this is actually becoming cumulative now. So I'm going to X out of this guy and actually just make this guy pure white. So I'm going to hold down the Command key and hit, because I want white is my background color, Command delete will fill this with white. And now if I click and drag across, that will actually fill that. Is not what I want to do. I'm going to throw that guy away and add a new blank layer. No, I want to do this on a blank layer. So then on a blank layer, again, working for foreground to transparency, I'm going to click and drag across. This is what I actually want to do. So you can see now what it's doing is it's actually giving me background. It's giving me my foreground color, which is black. But then instead of going towards white, which is my background color, it simply fades out. This is actually, so I'm going from a black color through to transparency. That's what I'm actually looking for in here. I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that, and I'm going to actually click on the next icon over. And the next icon over, I'm going to go back to that original foreground to background color. So again, on the drop-down menu, back to foreground to background color. But I'm going to click on the second one over and click and drag this out. This is a circular gradient, and you can see it starts with black in the center, and then it goes out into a circle to white. If I click on the next of the little icons over and click and drag out again, what this is supposed to be is it's supposed to be what it would be like. It's giving you the shadowing of what it would be like if you were to look either into a cone or at the point of a cone. So the cone point is either receding away from you or it's coming towards you. That's what is going on. Here, the next of the little icons over, if you click and drag down just slightly, what this is a mirrored gradient. So what it will do is it'll actually start with background color, move to foreground color, and then drop back out to background color. If you wanted just the opposite of this, you would hit the X key to flip your foreground and background colors. And now when you click and do the same gradient that you drag out, you'll actually get the inverse part of that. And then finally, the last one on here, on the edge out here, is supposed to be, if you click and drag it, again, this is not looking into the point of a cone. This would be actually looking into the, if you were to imagine standing inside a hollow pyramid, you would either be looking at the apex of the pyramid in front of you, or the reverse. You are actually outside the pyramid, looking down on top of it, looking at its point with the sides receding away from you. But to build shadows, what we need to do is, the way we need to set up our tool is, you need to click on this flyout menu. We need to actually go from foreground color to transparency. In my case now, because white is my foreground color, that's what's showing up here. I don't actually want that to be, I want it to be black. So I'm going to click out of that. I'm going to hit the X key to make black my foreground color. And now you'll see that the gradient type here is going from black to transparency. And then I also want to click on a circular gradient. That's what I'm actually going to use to build my shadows for this image. I'm going to throw this layer away again because I don't want to bother undoing all of that. I'm going to turn everybody on again. So I'm simply going to hold down the Option key, click on the eyeball, and then drag down through everybody else so that I've got all my background layers on, I've got all my color layers on. I'm going to click on that hue saturation layer to make it active, and then I'm going to add a blank layer above it simply by clicking on New Layer. I'm going to double click on that name and call it Shadow 1 and say OK. I'm going to zoom into this girl's feet now. And we're going to start doing this. You don't really need to worry too much about the size of gradient you pull on this because we're going to change it completely. But this is how we're going to do it. Working on this blank shadow layer right here with the gradient tool, the G key, you simply want to click and drag out, and you will see that it makes a stain on your image. It's a circular gradient. It goes from black to a very sort of, it fades out to transparency. So does everybody have this? Don't need to worry about its size. Then hit Command T. That will give you a transform dialog box. The transform dialog box will allow you to control this gradient. If you click and you start to drag down, you'll actually see it makes it smaller. If you add the Shift key as you click and drag down, you'll see that it actually crushes it to distort the tool. Now, this tool works different in 2019 than it does in 2018. Are you guys in 18 or 19? 18? Okay, hang on 1 second. I'll be right with you. Ooh. I am not touching that. Yeah, let me throw this on my desktop really quick. Okay, guys, I'm back with you. I'm just in the same place that you are right now. So again, I'm going to add a blank layer to this. Hit the G key, make sure my gradient is going from black to transparent. Make sure that it is a circular gradient. I'm going to zoom in here close to her feet, about like that. I'm going to simply click and drag out. I've got a black gradient that's sitting right here. That's exactly the way I want it. Command T will bring up the transform dialog box. If I click on the top and bring it down, it will actually crush it. If you add the Shift key, it will actually, let me undo that really quickly. Add the Shift key and bring it down. It still does the same thing. Add the Option key and bring it down. It will crush it from both ends, which is what I really want to do. Either way, you need to actually get it smaller. And then it needs to be narrower. It's too wide right now. So again, holding down the Option key, I'm going to drag and make it a little bit narrower. And it's about this shape right now. It's actually pretty hard to see, but that's the beautiful thing about it, because it's functioning like a real shadow would actually work. And then I'm going to actually lay it here that's underneath her foot. And then I'm going to hit the return key to actually go ahead and commit this right now. Now in this case, I feel like it's pretty much in the right place, but we need to continue to build these shadows up, and that's the nature of shadows and good shadow building, is that you do them step by step. So again, I'm going to hit the D key to default, make sure my foreground and background colors are the same. I am still working on this layer. I'm actually going to add a new blank layer on top of this, and I'm going to do the same thing again. Hit the G key to get to the gradient tool, click and drag out. You will get a gradient. Command T to transform it. Hold down the Option key, crush it. Also make it narrower. Click and drag it into place. Hit the return key to go ahead and commit this. Now, some people would say, well, you know, virtually that part works out really well, but that's not really believable to me. If you turn this guy on and off, you'll see that it looks like it's strictly horizontal. You don't have to stick with horizontal. With this second shadow selected, with that layer selected, hit Command T again. You can rotate the shadow. So I'm simply going to click and rotate it so that it pulls up, so that it's actually a little bit more like it would actually be on her. And then I'm going ahead and hit the Enter key. Now in this case, we've got some shadow that's coming a little bit over the front of her shoe that I don't think should really be there. So in shadow making, there's 3 keys that you hit over and over and over again. The first one is the G key, that gives you the gradient tool. The second one is Command T, that gives you the transform tool. The third is the E key, and that gives you the eraser. With the eraser selected, you'll see that the mode up here, it should be a brush type. You want to go ahead and leave your opacity 100%, but you want to drop your flow down to like a 10. To see what this is going to do, I need everybody to make a brand new file. So before you do that, up to the Photoshop menu, down to Preferences, down to Workspace. I never get this right. Not Workspace, Interface, not Interface, General. In General, you want to click on this Use Legacy New Window Document Interface. Say OK to that. And then hit Command N, or go up to the File menu and come down to New. And just make an 8x10 image, or something that's close to an 8x10 image. You can leave it at 72 pixels per inch. It doesn't matter. Go ahead and say OK to that. Again, you'll have an image right here. If you hit the G key, you will get the gradient tool. If you click and drag it out, it will give you the gradients that we've been looking at. Command T will put a transform set of brackets around this. Oh, I'm sorry. Hang on. I did that wrong. Command Z to undo that. You need a blank layer on top of this. Now your gradient tool, G key, click and drag out. You'll have a gradient there. Now Command T, you'll get the tools on this. Again, clicking down one will simply compress it. If you add the Options key, it will do it together. Again, you can actually make it narrower. You can change the size of it. So I'm going to go ahead and change the size of it till it's sort of like this. Again, you can rotate it slightly. Hit the return key or click on the check mark. Either one will actually do it. Now when you hit the E key, you will get the eraser. And you can see in the eraser tool, I'm actually going to keep my eraser with a soft edge, so 0% hardness. 100% flow, but I'm actually 100% opacity, but I'm going to drop my flow down to 10%. And I'm going to zoom in on this image now so you can really see what's going on. What happens with flow now, remember, flow is, this eraser is going to happen over time. We don't need to keep, like opacity, we don't need to keep picking the brush up and setting it down again. We can just rub. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just start to rub back and forth. And you can see, you can reshape this entire shadow. But it doesn't take off on you really, really quickly. It actually allows you to then control this. Does this make sense, everybody? So I'm going to jump out of that. You can close that up. You don't need to save it. We need to do that on the very front of the shadow of this girl because there's a shadow that's coming in front of her foot that would never be there. So I'm simply going to, with the eraser tool, click to actually get rid of that guy right there. And now you can see, I'm going to double click this, and the top name, my layer 2, I'm going to call it Shadow 2. I'm going to double click on layer 1 and call it Shadow 1. Then with Shadow 1 selected and active, I'm going to hold down the Shift key and I'm going to select Shadow 2 so that both of these guys are highlighted. And then I'm going to come up to the menu, the flyout menu that's right across from layers, and I'm going to click and say, I want to do a new group from layers. So what this is going to do is it's going to build a new group from the layers that have been highlighted. A dialog will open up, and I'm going to call this Shadows. And say OK. And now what you can see is that both of those layers have been put in this group called Shadows. You can open it up and still work on them, or you can collapse them. But what this also allows us to do is to turn this on and off. And you can see the shadow part that we're actually building in here. And I'm going to zoom back out now and take a look at this. And between the moss on the top of that girl's shoe and everything else, this actually grounds her in, I think, pretty well. Again, if you felt like you needed to work a little part of that shadow a little bit more, you certainly would be able to. We are going to continue this process and do the shadow for the other foot over here really quickly. So again, I've opened up my shadow group. I'm going to click on the top to make Shadow 2 active. I'm going to add a new blank layer on top of that. I'm going to rename it Shadow 3. Guys, true shadows are very complex, and they're made up of multiple versions of doing this exactly the way we are doing this. I'm going to zoom into the other foot over there really quickly. Hit the G key to get the gradient tool. Click and drag out. I've got a gradient now that's happening. Command T to transform it. I'm going to hold down the Option key so that they collapse from both ends. Again, I'm going to make this one significantly skinnier and flatter. And I'm going to come over here and drag this guy underneath this foot right here. Also, if you find that your transforming box snaps to something, if it's gone a little bit too far, you can use your arrow keys to actually drag it down. So I'm going to pull my arrow key out just a little bit to bring this guy down a little bit. I'm going to hit OK, the check mark OK to do that. Hit the G key again to get the gradient tool. I'm going to click, Command Z to undo that. You need a new layer. I'm going to call it Shadow 4. Now with the G key selected, click and drag out another gradient. Command T to transform this guy. I'm going to press this guy flat and bring the entire thing in here. Narrow it down. Drop the arrow key down a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and hit the return on that, and then I'm going to do some erasing work on this guy. So the E key to actually get the erasing tool, and I'm going to drop it off of both sides here. Then I'm going to click this guy on and off, and I feel like it's coming down a little bit too much. That feels better to me. Still got a little too much on the side. That actually feels much better to me. I'm going to double click on the hand to kick back out and then slowly zoom my way in. Remember, I've actually, I don't know if you guys have this color sampler tool on yours as well. That's another thing that Command H will hide. So if you click on Command H, it'll temporarily get rid of that guy. And now you can actually see the difference if you turn on all your shadows and off. And you can see that we have actually built good shadows and anchored this girl into the woods and into the ground. Does this make sense to everybody? Are there questions about this? We good on this part? Okay, I want to show you something really quickly. You guys aren't going to have this. Hey, Claire, were you the one who did the garbage cans last week? Do you mind if I borrow your garbage cans really quickly? Guys, I'm actually going to pull it out. I want everybody to work on this one with me. All right, so can you guys go to our server really quick? There's a file in there called Thomas_Claire_7.2. Can you grab that and drag that to your desktop? Try a second time. Hit close. Do you still have the Tikal up on there? Do you have that part anywhere in there? Then click on the server. Click on the little Apple guy down at the bottom. Is that where you're getting the error message? Then yeah, you're gonna have to restart. All right. Did everybody else get Claire? Okay. So if we double click on that to go ahead and launch this. How many in this room know about layer styles? Okay. So where we're going to go to next. We are going to start with this first layer here. It's one of these garbage cans right here. Actually, I'm going to do this. I'm going to turn off the bottom layer so that you just have the garbage cans going. And I'm also going to turn off her sharpening layer. It's what's sitting up on the top. And you can see that the only thing we've got now is just the garbage cans on an empty blank background. Does everybody have this? Okay. So I'm going to select the very top of the garbage cans, the very top smart object. And I'm going to hold down Command, Option, Shift, and hit the letter E. And you'll see what it does is that it puts all the garbage cans on a single layer. Now these are all isolated. They've all actually been knocked out. If you zoom in and take a quick look at this, though, you can spot some of where Claire has her masking hasn't been necessarily the best thing in the world. So we need to clean that up a little bit really quickly. So to do that, again, hit the E key to get the eraser. Drag your flow all the way back up to 100%, your opacity at 100%, and simply come in here and, well, that's ridiculous. This is going to take us way too long. So instead, I'm going to go after this another way. I'm going to put a layer mask on this guy. So again, I'm simply clicking to add a layer mask to this. I'm going to hit the B key to get a brush. Hit the D key to default my foreground and background colors to black and white. Hit the X key to get black as my foreground color. So all I'm doing is painting with a brush. I'm going to make it a completely hard brush. So dragging the hardness all the way to 100%. So I've got a hard brush, normal blending mode, 100% opacity, 100% flow. Black is my foreground color. I'm working, what?
Mine doesn't work that well.
What's not working that well?
Like it's not harsh at all.
Your brush?
Yeah.
So when you clicked on your drop-down menu, did you change your hardness all the way to 100%?
Forget. Keep going.
Yep. Are you okay, Liz?
Oh, mine, it's still not that good. And I'm at 100% opacity, 100% flow, 100% hardness.
Your smoothing is it? Oh, is it?
What's interesting is, no, I'm looking at mine. It's doing the same thing. Oh, wait. How bizarre is this? Simply, oh, wait, the other individual layers are showing. Turn all the other layers off. Sorry, guys. Turn everything off except for the one we're working on. Yeah, sorry. They're all showing through. And I'm just cleaning this up a little bit. Okay, good enough. Okay, so I don't want you to turn any of the layers on except for the cityscape that's at the very bottom. So you can see you've got all of these garbage cans that are sitting on there. And the problem with these garbage cans, or what I don't believe about these garbage cans, again, is there is no subtle anchor that's actually a shadow that's sort of anchoring these guys. So if we go up to the top right now, I'm going to remove this layer mask and apply it. I don't want there to be any confusion about what's going on here. So by removing the layer mask and applying it, it will get rid of all those stray little pixels that are running around in there. So click on the layer mask, drag it down to the garbage can, and a dialog box will open up. And instead of deleting the mask, because if you click on delete, it will simply get rid of the mask and all those little pixels that we're trying to hide will show up again. If you hit cancel, it'll simply go back. Nothing will happen. And if you hit apply, it will get rid of all those little pixels. And so we've basically got a clean image. Is everybody good on this? Okay. So if you click right here on the image part, this first part right here is your pixel image. If you click on add layer mask, it actually puts a layer mask on there. You can throw that layer mask away. I just want to show you well, I take it back. I'm going to cancel this. Look up at my screen really quickly, guys. You don't need to do this. I just want to show you the geography of this layers palette. So I'm going to make this guy wider. So what you can see when we added the layer mask is you start with pixels here. Then you've got a layer mask. Then you've got the name of the layer. So I'm going to double click on this and I'm going to call it comp. But then you've got this layer over here, this area right over here that looks to be empty, but it's not. If you double click on this layer over here, it opens up a layer style dialog box. So what I need everybody to do is, if you can't drag your image out far enough, again, I'm going to get rid of my layer mask here because I don't need this. But you need to click on this area over here. If you can't get to this area over here by double clicking on it to open up this layer style dialog box, I'm going to cancel out of this. You can click on this FX that's at the bottom. And at the FX at the bottom, click on blending options and it will bring that same dialog box open. So I need everybody to have this dialog box open. Are we good on this? Okay, in this dialog box, you can do all sorts of things in this dialog box. So the first thing that you can actually do in this is you can simply drag the opacity down and it controls the opacity of your layer. That's something you can actually do on the layers palette itself, though, so that's not that big of a deal. But what I'm trying to do is get to these things right over here, these things that are called layer styles. If you come down here and you click on drop shadow, it will actually add a drop shadow to your image. And in my case, it looks really wonky. I've got a lot of weirdness on here that doesn't really look like a drop shadow to me. If you actually click on the name drop shadow, in addition to the checkbox, you get to the drop shadow control area right here. So in this control area, this actually controls what you see in the drop shadow part. Does that make sense, everybody? So in our case, I don't know if yours is going to be the same as mine. It probably is not the same as mine. At the very top, you will have opacity slider that you can see will actually make your shadows darker and lighter. And again, I've got a very weird shadow going on, so don't worry, I'm going to fix that in a second. To control the actual quality of the shadow, we need to do distance first. So I'm going to click on distance, and I'm going to start to drag it down. And what distance will do is it's saying how far from your subject do you want this shadow thing to actually be. And so I'm cranking mine down to about a 7 pixels. Spread has to do with how wide the shadow is actually going to be before it fades completely out. So it's going from the shadow part, the most concentrated part, out to the spread out part. So again, I'm going to drag spread and I'm going to pull it in a little bit till I'm also around a 7. And then size controls how big the shadow is. And so I'm going to drag it back in here as well. And I have no idea why I've got still this much shit that is actually happening on this guy. So, anyway, the last thing I'm going to show you is the global light slider right here. This guy can actually control the direction of your shadow, but we don't have a shadow that we can actually work with here because there's still too much contamination on this guy. So, is yours working?
Yeah, mine's working. As long as you keep everything under 10.
Yeah, why is my, I've still, it's like, I've still got, there's nothing in this. Well, there's a few things in this, but. All right, so yours is working, right? All right. Oh. I've got multiple drop shadows. That's bizarre. All right, anyway. Yeah, I'm clearly not getting what you guys are getting. So are you guys getting a drop shadow, though? Okay, so you're not going to see this on my screen, obviously, but at any rate, if you drag this angle slider right here, this is actually the angle of the light that's creating the shadow. So again, I'm going to kick mine. This is not working fucking at all. Anyway, you should be able to control the light where this is actually going, and you should be able to create a drop shadow. And then if you say OK to that, then turn on your background, your bottom background right here, you should actually see drop shadow that's underneath this that makes it a little bit more convincing. Is that working for you guys?
I upped the distance but kept the
Right.
spread and size at 0.
Right.
I got this, but it also dropped a shadow onto like an imaginary.
It drops the shadow onto everything, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's not what we want. So we're going to do another trick on this really quick because this one will work for me. You will notice down here that you've actually got your effects are sitting right here at the bottom. You can actually throw these guys away. So I'm going to click on drop shadow. I'm going to drag that to the trash to actually get rid of it. So we're going to build a drop shadow in a different way. And the different way we're going to do it is that we are going to load these garbage cans as a selection. So to do that, hover over the image layer itself, hold down the command key and click. And you should get the marching ants around everybody. Does everybody have this? Okay, then again, you want your shadows to be underneath your images, not on top of them. So I'm going to select on the layer underneath this one. I'm going to then click on to add a blank new layer. And with this new layer selected, I am going to fill this with black. Because black is my foreground color, I can hold down Option Delete and it will actually fill that with black. Command D to deselect. Now I'm going to re-anchor my layers so that my screen looks like Urals. Okay, if you turn off the comp that's sitting up at the top of the image layers, what you'll see is a bunch of black garbage cans. Does everybody have this part? Are we good on this part?
Wait, did you make your layer? Oh, wait, so Command Delete?
No, I didn't. Hit Command Z really quick.
Okay.
So what do you have? Okay, so did you fill this? Turn off the eyeball for layer 2.
This needs to be filled with black, or no?
Well, no, because so you're gonna turn that guy back on, and turn the one underneath it off. So are those both the garbage cans? Turn both of them off.
I don't think this is anything anymore. Turn them both off.
Yeah, the one. Also, you need to turn off that sharpen layer, and then you need to turn off all the garbage cans. Okay, now fine. Turn the layer 2 on. That's your garbage cans. Command click on that icon on the pixel layer part.
On this part?
That just loaded everybody's selection. Now go to the one underneath it, turn its eyeball on, and fill it with black. Black is your foreground color, which will make you option delete. Okay, so now if you turn off layer 2, you should see black versions of your garbage can. That's exactly what you want. Okay, so with the black versions of the garbage can, did everybody have that underneath? Everybody's got this underneath, right? Select the layer itself, the layer number 2. Hit the V key to get the move tool, and then go to your arrow keys and simply tap down once on your arrow key, tap down a second time, tap down a third time, a fourth time, a fifth time, a sixth time, 7. 7 looks about right, don't you think? That's your shadow. Now, what's happening here is I'm also getting shadow that's underneath the handles, which would actually be there. But the last thing that we actually need to do here, I'm going to make it look like these things are really sort of lifted up off the ground. I'm going to tap it down till a few more times till I can really see the shadow pretty well right here. So the last thing I'm going to do, if you want to get into really super believable shadow part, is that we need to pick a shadow that's already in our scene that we can match. So I'm going to hold down the space bar and the command key, and I'm going to zoom in to the car. I'm going to look at this area right in here, and I'm going to do a color sampler of it. So I'm simply going to pick my color sampler tool, and I'm going to come over and I'm hovering over the car, and you can see that the shadow underneath the car is not a pure black. It's actually got a little bit of red in it. It's what I'm reading here is an R of 5 and a green of 1 and a blue of 1. That's a color. That's not a pure black. My shadow, on the other hand, is a pure black. Now I've got shadow that's happening under here that I don't think should actually be here. It's underneath this lid part. There's nothing that's stopping me from going ahead and putting a layer mask on this guy. So I am going to put a layer mask on that. Hit the B key to get a brush really quickly. Make sure that black is my foreground color and simply get rid of all the shadow part that shouldn't be there. So it should be underneath this guy, but not that part of it. Yeah, that part actually feels... If you feel like you went too far with that, hit the X key to get white as your foreground color. And you can paint that to bring it back in. So again, I'm making it a little further down than it actually should be. And I'm not going to do this for all the garbage cans, but I would take care of those guys right here. So at any rate, I need to make this the same color, though, as the color that's underneath the car. So to do that, you actually come over to your shadow part right here, hold down the command key and click on the shadow. It will reload that guy, and then you actually are going to add a curve to this. So over to your adjustment layer, come up here, and we are going to add a curve to this. And you'll see that it adds a curve with a mask already built on it. With the mask built on it, I'm going to turn off the shadow that actually built this so you don't see anything now. You can see that these guys are actually gone. Again, when I turned that layer off, those guys are now gone. So, but with the curve selected, I can now build something that is the same color as that 611 was under the car that's over here. So to do the 611, I'm going to simply click on the my curve here at the top, the white point at the top, and I'm going to click and I'm going to drag it straight down. And you can see it's starting to put my shadow back in. I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to drop a color sampler point on this. And then I look at my readout right here, and you can see in my readout that this is getting there, but it's not quite there. I'm going to continue to drag this guy down till I get a 6 for my red value. 7 is close enough. Then I'm simply going to go to my green curve and click and drag it down till it gets down to a 1. And do the same thing with my blue channel. So now I've actually got, this is not a pure black. This is actually the shadow of the color of the shadow that's underneath the car. Does this make sense to everybody? We good on this? Again, then working on this layer mask, you would have to fix it. A B key to actually get rid of all these parts right here. So working on the layer mask, I would eliminate all this part right here so that it's just underneath the car. The other thing that you can do about this is if you feel like the edge of this is too sharp, and I feel like it probably is a little bit too sharp, you can simply blur your mask. So come up to the filter menu, down to blur, down to Gaussian blur, and we can soften the edge that's underneath the garbage can right now. I think that 6 is a little strong. Drop it back to like a 3 or 4. I think that guy's probably correct. And this is now what it looks like. Make sense? Alrighty. Really quickly, we'll finish this last part up with resizing. So we need to look really quickly at this image right here. Pixels. What is a pixel? Oh, come on. You guys have been doing photography for at least a few years now, and you don't know what a pixel is? Or you're just over it? Over it, all right? Okay, let's look at this instead. This is a sensor that has a row of pixels across the top. They're actually discrete little sites. They look just like this. They look exactly like they're little buckets that actually collect photons, and they're just in rows. And if you take a look at this sensor, this is a sensor from a 1D Mark III. I mean 1D Mark II, 1DS Mark II. There's 3,000 of them across this way, and there's 2,000 rows that are going up. There's 3,000 pixels in this direction and 2,100 pixels. So ultimately, there's 6 million pixels that are actually on the sky. Does that sort of make sense? And every single one of these actually becomes an element in your image. And what pixel actually stands for is picture element. So I've taken this area of my image and I've blown it up in a big way, and you'll see these little squares here. And I'm sure you guys have had this happen to you on an image before, right? You can see it. We can actually do it. Take any image that you have in Photoshop right now. I'm going to open up the one that we just had. Again, what that is it's the area. So in the case of 3,000 by 2,000, you multiply those together just like you would width and height to come up with area, and you end up with 6 million pixels.
Yeah, but when you get sold a camera, they're not like, this is 6 million pixels.
Sure they do. They call it megapixels. Mega stands for million. I know. Okay, we've got to clearly go through all of this. I was hoping to pass over this, but it just goes to show every time you try to take the shortcut, you fuck yourself. And so we are maybe not going to get through all of resizing tonight, but we will have a foundation on which to put all of this stuff. So we're going to bite it and go down this road.
Is this one of those things that we're supposed to learn?
Probably. All right, so I'm going to only start back here a little ways. We won't go through it all here. Okay. So have we done any of the digital fundamentals in this class? Yeah, so did we go through this? Okay, everybody in this room understands this equation, right? It's really quite simple. Right?
Is it exposure in a fancy looking way?
No. This is actually the equation that the people on Wall Street used to assess risks for default credit swaps, which led to the crash of 2008 that ruined everybody. I don't care who you are, you were impacted by this. They didn't understand the equation clearly, right? So anyway, the takeaway from this is that this is what my feeling about power without knowledge is. This is what I feel like power with knowledge is. So all sensors, there is one exception to this. There's a company called Foveon and then there's scientific companies that make very specialized sensors, but With those exceptions, whatever, every sensor in the world that you deal with is a grayscale sensor. They're all grayscale. They do not read color. They can discriminate about color, but they do not read color. All they do is they do grayscale. So what these are, they're called light cavities. Sometimes they're called photo buckets. Sometimes they're called photosites. All they do is count photons. So you can see here, I've got red, green, and blue photons. A photon is actually a particle of light. Light is not exactly a particle, and it's not exactly a wave. It is actually both. However, photons, particles, actually really do exist. They are real things. And they go into these light cavities. You make an exposure, so your camera opens up. It lets light in. If, for instance, there was absolutely no light fell into this one cavity right here, this would be considered a black. If in this cavity right down here, it completely filled up with 255 photons, that would be considered a white. If there was a photo bucket site out here that filled up with 128 photons, that would be a middle gray. Does that sort of make sense how this works?
Yeah.
So basically what it does, is what your sensor does, is it lets light come in, it collects photons, and then it counts the number of photons that are in there, and it assigns a level of gray to that. And that's how you get a grayscale image on a grayscale sensor. Does that make sense? However, we like color. We want to deal with color. So this is, we're going to scale that 0 to 255. We want to deal with color. We like color, right? So there was a very clever guy back at Kodak in the 60s who came up, his last name was Bayer. He came up with what's called a Bayer array. And what the Bayer array does is that these are color filters that actually sit on top of your photosites. And when you understand this technology, you understand how incredible your sensor really is. So imagine your sensor that's the size of a postage stamp that has 6 million of these sites on it, and they actually go in and they put color filters on top of every one of those little baby pixels. It's insane. However, what happens is this. In this Bayer array, they actually alternate. So you'll see here, you've got a blue filter right here, and then a green one, and then another blue, and a green one, and another blue, and another green one. And in the next row down, you've got a red one, and a green one, and a red one, and a green one, and a red one. And what happens with these is that the color filter that you have will allow photons of that color to pass through. All of the others, and this is a little bit misleading here, this looks like they're bouncing off. What happens really is in the filter, all the other colors are absorbed by the filter, but they don't pass through. Does that make sense? So you can see here where there's a blue filter on top of this photosite, it will let through all the blue photons. Where there's a green filter, it'll let through the green ones. However, when I get back to the blue ones, it will reject, or it absorbs all the yellow, all the red ones, and it absorbs all the green ones, and it lets the blue ones pass through. Does that sort of make sense, what's going on?
What if one corner of your image is red and there's not a red filter?
We're going to get to that, because this is the problem of it all. Max.
Where are there more green ones than?
We're going to get to that too. Oh no, CCD is the same thing. They all work the same way. Foveon is the only one who works differently, and what they do is they actually use penetrate, because light functions at different wavelengths, and they have a filtering system that allows it to penetrate, and they have a sensor that's a stacked sensor so you get discrete colors at all three, but in all the others no. So this is both types. Okay, so Liz has a great question here. Why are there more green than there are blue and red? Anybody have any idea why? Sensors, all of this technology is based on how your eyes work, and your eyes have twice the receptors for green light as they do for blue and for blue and for red. So again, the whole red, green, blue thing was based on your eyes. That's how your eyes actually function. It's not some variation of that. So why are we more sensitive to green?
Because our ancestors needed to be able to see predators in the trees.
Predators in the trees. What were you going to say, Broderick? Evolutionary thing. What you find, and this actually is true in Photoshop as well, and this plays into us when we work into Photoshop, is that green primarily is detail. Red is contrast. Blue is noise. So if you've got a really noisy image, you can actually go in and blur your blue channel, and you actually suppress the noise without ruining the detail, because the detail is sitting in your green channel. Anyway, just so you know. Anyway, so that's what's going on here. So that is what your sensor sees on the side. It sees these discrete colors of red, green, and blue. It does not see a full color image like this, not at all. It sees something that looks like that. And that's actually a version that's been lightened up because your sensor also doesn't see that. It also sees something that's much, much, much darker. So how do we then get RGB color to exist at every single pixel? Because you're right, you need a value of red and a value of green and a value of blue for every single one of these pixel sites. But the way the sensor's built is I only get red here at, I'm just going to call this R19, row 19. I only get red pixels here. I only get green ones here. And I only get blue ones here. However, to have a full color image, I need an RGB value for every single one of these. I need the green and the blue value for this red one. I need the red and the blue value for this green one. And I need the green and red value for this blue one. Does that make sense? So the way they do this, they do it through math. And so what they'll do is, so for instance, we're going to take R19 right here and say, how do they come up with the RGB value for R19? Does that make sense what I'm doing? So the value for red exists. They simply count the red photons that came into it. It's got a red filter on it, so they simply count the photons that come in it. So red is simply what R19 is. Does that make sense? Simple. To figure out the green, what they do is they take G15, they add it to G20, add it to G23, add it to G18, and then divide by 4. They average the 4 greens that are around this, and that's the color of green that they stick in this pixel. Now, that's not a legitimate green, a legitimate value, but that's how they do it. Does that make sense? Then for the blue value, they take blue 14, add it to blue 16, add it to blue 24, to blue 22. They add those 4 up, divide by 4. That's the blue value that goes into here. It's not real, but that's how they do it. Does that sort of make sense?
And then they take the average
So,
of those two and make the red?
no, the red already exists because it counted the red. The red was the one value that's there. It's the one real value, right? It was the number of photons of red that came through. This is why you have to sharpen raw files. This is why your files are softened, is because they're doing all this averaging of math around here. The value of green and blue that they're putting in here comes from areas that are not underneath this guy, and that creates softening. Make sense? But again, they have no choice because all sensors are grayscale. So this is a 2000 by 3000 sensor, pixel sensor. So if you actually do the measurements, if you multiply these together, so again, it's just imagining, let's say you're in a room that's 10 feet by 10 feet. What's the area of the room? 100 square feet. You multiply the length times the width. It's the same thing here. You're multiplying the 2000 times 3000, you get basically 6 million pixels or 6 megapixels. Does that make sense? It's not a lot, but again, this is the sensor size. This is not your file size. This is where, hang on to your hats, kids. This is where it gets bumpy. So how on earth do you end up with an 18 megabyte file from a 6 megabyte sensor, which every single person in this room does? Did you ever question it?
I never.
Yeah. So what happens is, remember the green on the sensor, remember, so in our case right here, 6 million pixels is what we've got, right? Half of them are green. So on my sensor, 3 million of them are green. However, I need 6 million greens. I need a color of green at every single pixel site, right? So I need 6 million because that's the size of my sensor. 3 million, half of the green is made up by math. Some poor little kid sitting in his basement, drinking Coke, masturbating feverishly, has figured out what your green, half of your green of your image should actually be. And he wrote the algorithm for it, and that's in your camera. Discouraging, isn't it? It gets better. Half of your green is figured out by math. When we come to red, remember, red is a half of the green. So there's only 1,500,000 pixels that are red. You still need 6 million of them. You need a red at every single site. That means 4,500,000 of them are developed by math. 3/4 of the red of your image is created by math. Not something you took, not something that got counted, faked by math. Same thing with blue.
Wait, why do you need 6 million total pixels?
Because you've got 6 million pixels and you need a red and a green and a blue value for every one of those 6 million pixels.
Just be divided in thirds then?
No, you need a red, green, and blue value at every single pixel or you don't have a color image.
Keep going. I'm not gonna
No,
ask more questions.
back.
No, I don't want to.
Don't you need, this needs a green and a blue value to go with it.
Yeah.
This needs a red and a blue value to go with it. Every single one of these needs an RGB value.
Well, there's like one filter, right? It's
There's only one filter, so they're making up the rest of it with math.
on the edge or in that.
In the
spot?
entire image, every single pixel has got ultimately at the end, 2/3 of it is created by math.
Yeah, okay, because it only holds one filter.
It only holds one color. So where do you get the other 2 colors? Math. Yes.
You
So
sound so mad about that. Why are you mad about
what
that?
I'm mad about is this. Wait till you see the consequences of this. So I start out with a sensor that's got 6 million pixels. However, I need 18 million of this.
I thought you only needed 6 million.
No, I need 6 million. There's 6 million sites, but now that I've got the colors, I've got a value. I've got 3 colors at each site value now, not just one. So I started out with 1 color, but now I've got 3 colors, so it's tripled. So this is why when you develop a file, it triples in size. Don't you guys know when you develop your CR2 files, they triple in size? You do now. Okay. So 2/3 of the information that comes off your sensor is created by math. There's implications about this that are worse. So 2/3 of the data is created by math. 2/3 of the light that hits your sensor is disregarded. It's thrown away. It doesn't get through.
Is that only true of digital, not film?
No, it's not true of film. True of digital. The demosaicing, that's what they call all this averaging, all the mathematical averaging, they call it demosaicing. That creates a softness that actually has to be sharpened. However, one of the raw upsides of this is a raw file, lossless, is 1/3 the size of your image file. It's the best compression you can get. Everybody who thinks that, oh yeah, I need a smaller file, I'm going to make a JPEG, throw away half of my information, I've got a smaller file. The raw file you started with is 1/3 of the size of your processed file, and it's got everything. It's got everything your camera can capture. So it's the perfect storage medium. You want to archive your stuff in a raw file. Makes sense? So that leads us to these things. These are pixel elements. That's what they call. It starts with the term picture. Okay, we're done. Let me get through picture. Let me get through this part really quick. Just this one last slide, and then we're out of here. So, every single pixel, if you actually take one of your files and you zoom way in on it, have you guys all seen these little squares that you come in? This little square represents one of those pixels that is on your sensor. Each one of these little things has an RGB value. That's what this is all about. Are we good about this part? Okay. So, anyway, you use millions of these things to combine together to create what we think is continuous tone. However, it's really not continuous tone. But because they're so small, we are under the illusion that it is continuous tone. Make sense? Yeah. And that's where we're going to end it right here. So I will see you guys next week, and we'll go from there.
Damn.
So we will get to scaling and resolution next week. And how are the series photograph stuff coming? Are you guys working on that?